Eu tinha uma imagem de caverna na minha cabeça que é totalmente assim, cada caverna é diferente da outra. Quando você escuta as histórias, você começa a ligar os pontinhos, tipo, da matéria, da teoria com a prática.
Com a nossa equipe, nós conseguimos fazer um passeio, integrando o João a toda a equipe e visitando todos os lugares. É possível que nós possamos trazer todos os alunos que sejam portadores de todas as formas de deficiência para uma inclusão efetiva.
É que é uma experiência nova, né? Agrega para a nossa vida. Você não só se aproxima de pessoas assim que você nunca imaginou que você ia se encontrar, se conversar, trocar uma ideia.
Que eles levassem essa forma diferente de aprender, né, para suas vidas. O espaço da aprendizagem é o mundo.
Sejam bem-vindos a Somos Educação. Estamos prontos para fazer sua escola crescer e se destacar no mercado. Nosso time de educadores, neurocientistas e especialistas em tecnologia tem a missão de compreender os aspectos que ditam a aprendizagem e propor soluções baseadas em evidências comprovadas cientificamente. Tudo para que os seus alunos aprendam mais e melhor. Seguimos investindo fortemente na transformação pedagógica e digital das nossas escolas parceiras. Quer conhecer mais a fundo as nossas soluções educacionais e entender quais delas conversam diretamente com os objetivos e a realidade da sua escola? Acesse o nosso site.
Muito prazer, eu sou o Isaac, a maior plataforma de serviços financeiros feita para escolas. Mais de 800 escolas já vivem uma experiência de gestão financeira escolar facilitada e pelo menos 300 mil famílias já foram impactadas em todo o Brasil. Somos apaixonados por educação como você. Acesse o site e saiba mais.
Na Red Balloon, nós crescemos em inglês. Acompanhamos os alunos por toda a vida escolar dos 3 aos 17 anos, desde 1969. Crescer com a gente na sua escola é aprender com uma metodologia exclusiva e muito natural. Nossas aulas se baseiam na disciplina positiva, na mentalidade de crescimento e no potencial de cada aluno. Assim, eles ampliam a capacidade de interpretar o mundo e conquistam seu lugar de destaque nele. Ensinamos também com aulas de programação e robótica, eventos temáticos e um currículo de matérias eletivas nacionais e internacionais em diversas áreas do conhecimento. Aqui, o aprendizado é baseado no multiletramento em língua inglesa e em habilidades de desenvolvimento pessoal. E sabe como damos vida a tudo isso? Por meio de professores apaixonados e em constante desenvolvimento. É hora de crescermos juntos!
Há 120 anos, nós criamos pontes, apoiamos escolas e estimulamos famílias e alunos a experimentarem suas melhores versões. Nascemos e existimos com um único objetivo: transformar a sociedade por meio do nosso compromisso com a educação. E como parte de um ecossistema vivo, nós também nos transformamos. Nós evoluímos. A nossa marca também. Hoje apresentamos a você um novo jeito da FTD Educação se comunicar. Nos transformamos para que a nossa marca reflita o que nós acreditamos, numa educação inovadora, flexível, parceira e humana. O futuro da educação não está distante. Para nós, ele já é realidade. Vamos conhecê-lo juntos. FTD Educação. Conectamos histórias, construímos futuros.
assunto é educar. A criatividade é a escolha certa que transforma a sua escola hoje e o amanhã dos seus estudantes. Conheça nossas 2 iniciativas pautadas nos conceitos da aprendizagem criativa e em seus pilares: projetos, paixão, pares e pensar brincando. Programa de aprendizagem criativa, dos 3 aos 14 anos, curricular, transdisciplinar e ancorado na BNCC. Hora da invenção, de 4 a 12 anos, extracurricular e com desafios criativos, design thinking e mão na massa. Investir em criatividade é garantir diferencial de mercado, motivando os estudantes, engajando educadores e encantando as famílias. Potencialize sua grade, desenvolva habilidades socioemocionais, prepare pessoas para o amanhã. Agora você já pode escolher ser a escola que forma ou a que transforma. Vem com a gente deixar o mundo mais criativo.
Okay, hello everybody. Good morning. Bom dia. My name is Brian Delgado, and I am happy to be part of the Ajuka Week program. And I am going to be giving a talk today titled Engagement or Die, which I'll say more about later. First, I'm going to start out by talking about who I am and why I'm here. I am a teacher, a longtime educator from the San Diego, California area, and had the opportunity to work at a school in San Diego for many, many years called High Tech High, that was and is doing liberation work in the classroom. So, pushing the bounds of what might be possible. So I got to experiment in that for years and years. And then more recently, and it actually grew out of an astronomy club that started at High Tech High. We, a couple of colleagues and myself branched off and started an organization called Blue Dot Education. And I think since I'm the stranger, the foreigner, speaking the funny language, it makes sense to share just a little bit more about who I am. So I'm going to bring up a slide. So I'll be pulling up slides from on occasion, just to show, because I like to show pictures and maybe some video. Let's see. Okay. So a little bit about who I am, because I think it impacts who we are, always impacts the work we're doing in education. And so over here on the left, this gentleman in the black and white photo, that's my grandfather. And he has an interesting story, but the culture of his family certainly impacted us. He is actually from a place in central Mexico called Guanajuato. And he, the story goes, crossed the border in El Paso, Texas, made his way across southern United States to Tucson, eventually ended up in California, but work drove him up into Montana, where he did some forestry work, and then eventually settled here where I was born. It's actually where my dad was born too. My dad is in the picture just below, next to my mom. So they are an interesting couple because they were a mixed race couple in the United States who got married in 1959 in a small rural town. And that had the effect of really putting us as kind of outsiders to the culture. And because the other thing was that they had lots of kids. So you can see next to this is my family. I have 11 siblings. And this ended up just giving me a vastly different perspective, I think, than most people. Most colleagues that I work with, but just most people in general. Because it's an interesting place to grow up where you're kind of not accepted by either culture. So the culture of, my father, which was, from Mexico, the culture of my mom, which she was from Southern Colorado. It peppers your perspective. And I was the kid in my family that really went for it in school. I wanted to be successful in school. I wanted to get the straight A's. I wanted to do what the teachers asked, because I was told over and over again, that's what's going to bring success. It's funny how that kind of works out. As educators, sometimes we sell a story to students and it isn't exactly true. My younger sister, who's just to the right of me in this photo, went a radically different direction. And I think did so largely because she just didn't connect with the type of learning processes that were being offered to her at that time in her life. She didn't want to simply, regurgitate information that teachers were asking her to regurgitate, which was pretty much the structure and the system of education at the time. And in a lot of places, it hasn't changed at all, which is sad to say, because that's, 30 years ago or so. So when I was in high school, we moved to San Diego. So I moved from a small rural town in the middle of the country to a bigger city, much more diverse. Went to a school that was wildly diverse, and then went to college and lived for 4 years in northern Indiana. My first job was as an engineer. So I worked as an engineer for a few years before falling into education. These other photos just show a little bit about me. I love to get out and adventure. This is from a rock climb I did on the side of El Cap in Yosemite National Park a few years ago. This is maybe 2 summers ago. I did a whitewater rafting trip. And this is my son and my partner. They're kind of the lights of my life, and certainly the people that I learn the most from when thinking about the work that we do. And this is a little bit about me. I think it's important that we know each other in this work. Maybe a little odd to start off with this. However, relationships totally matter. Knowing who the people are totally matter. And I think I bring a unique perspective, having come from a mixed race family in the United States that was, essentially, growing up in poverty in this country as well, but then going to the fancy university that was ranked in the top 20. It definitely, you go through it because the cultural differences between what I grew up in and what the schools, and in particular that university, was asking of me, really made it difficult, really spun me for years, because I didn't know how I was supposed to behave. Was it supposed to be the family that I grew up in and loved, or was it supposed to be what this university and the school system was telling me? And it's taken me actually years to reconcile those two things. And this, I hope, I'm going to come back to this, which is why I start here, because it's been an important part of my work. So let's stop that. So that's a little bit about who I am. Okay, so now I'm going to share. Whoop. Okay, so some background noise there. So now I'm going to share a little bit about the organization that we started. Um, and this goes back to probably 2012 or 13. Some students wanted to begin going on camping trips. And they introduced me to astronomy and to the night sky. So we were going on monthly camping trips, and I woke up one night and I heard them talking nearby, but kind of up on a ridge, and walked up, and they were taking pictures of the stars in the sky, and it this was probably our fifth trip, so maybe 5 months in, I realized that they had been doing this work, and it was one of the reasons they were asking to go on the trip, and it was unbeknownst to me. So I joined them in this journey to dive into astronomy. We we became sort of partners in learning, and over the next few years grew this club to become like a central part of the school. And at some point along the way, the students were wanting to do bigger and bigger projects, and we realized we don't have the funding for it. We're a public school that's like most public schools, is underfunded. You're always scrapping for whatever dollars you can, and so we actually were able to get some of the work that we were doing out, and found an angel donor who came to us and said, I want you to start your own organization, because I see the work you're doing is important, it's significant, it has impact with kids. And so we started the organization I work for now, called Blue Dot Education, which grew out of the High Tech High network of schools. I think this is important as well, to share these images. But what Blue Dot Education is, I'm gonna wait for this to load. You'll see this logo, and the logo is actually based on an image that was made by NASA. In the late 60s, in the late 1960s, scientists at NASA realized that that they could send probes into space and use the gravity of the inner planets, Mars, to slingshot a probe past then Jupiter and Saturn and into the outer solar system. This was called the Voyager mission, and they actually launched 2 probes. And so they began working on it in the late 60s, because I think the window was this alignment of the planets where they could do the slingshot was happened in 1977, and I think that alignment of the planets wasn't going to happen again for another 120 years. So so they slingshot this probe past the inner planets into the outer solar system in 1977. Those probes are still out there. They've actually exited the solar system, they exited the Oort cloud, using 1977 technology. I laugh to myself because the camera I have on this phone is probably way better than the camera on the Voyager probe that's out there. But as that probe was heading out past Jupiter, Carl Sagan, past Saturn, Carl Sagan, one of the scientists, realized, we have, before we shut the cameras down, we have one last chance to take an image of Earth. And so they turned the camera around, shot an image of the Earth in 1990, and that the Earth is that little dot. It's about a pixel-sized dot, and these, you can see the yellow, and there's a green and a red band of light. of diffracted light, and the Earth sits right in that yellow band. And so Sagan, being the storyteller that he was, stories super important, told this story about the image. And I'll read it. He said, "We succeeded in taking that picture from deep space. And if you look at it, you see a dot. That's here, that's home, that's us. On it, everyone you've ever heard of, every human being who ever lived out their lives. The aggregate of all the joys and sufferings, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines. Every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilizations, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every hopeful child, every mother and father, every inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam." And so the point of this is, given the vastness of where humanity had gotten to at that point, the most technologically advanced thing that they created shot out into the outer solar system. It takes an image of us, flips the perspective. The further you look out, the more you're forced to look in. And I would say the other thing about this story that Sagan wrote is the mundane people he is talking about. Sure, he's talking about kings, but he's also talking about peasants and couples in love and hopeful childs and mothers and fathers. He's talking about all of us, all there on that dot. And the conclusion of this speech, because the speech goes on for a little bit, at the conclusion he says that this image of looking back and seeing on this tiny pixel-sized dot everything that we've ever known has occurred. It forces us to consider the fact that the calling for us is to take care of ourselves and this planet that we live on. And so when we were thinking of what do we want to be about, as we were starting this organization, that was it. Social justice, environmental justice, take care of ourselves, take care of each other. And the most sophisticated technologies we've ever built point to that as the thing that we should be doing. And that's why, this is sort of our spiritual center is this, this astronomical image that was taken by NASA, and the speech written by Sagan, called the Pale Blue Dot speech. So that is where Blue Dot education comes from. Stop share there. Okay. And this talk is titled, interestingly enough, Engagement or Die. And I bring that up because I wasn't the person who came up with the title for that. Thank you, Marcos, wherever you are. Marcos named this talk. He wanted me to do a talk titled Engagement or Die. We've been working with each other for probably 4 or 5 years now. Students will come out to San Diego. We'll run them through programs, whether it's ocean sciences or rocket building. I have also been down and spoke, I think it was 2019, I was at the Ajuka Week conference and spoke at it and then ran a workshop. And so I think he knows that for myself, engagement is incredibly important. It's this foundational thing. Without it, you're not going to get anything done in schools. However, I didn't get the title at first. I was like, Engagement or Die? That sounds so intense. But life has a way. And I'm thinking actually about my son and one of my son's friends. They're 10th graders. uh, you know, and this engagement or diet, like it's sort of like a, you know, it can be like an action sport, or like, yeah, you know, like it reminds me of like surf or die, or, you know, something along those lines. But when I think about this 10th grader that I know, it's like it's a literal thing. Um, he lives in a small house in the wrong part of town. Uh, he's not the cute third grader anymore. He's you know, the 10th grade boy who, you know, for better or worse, the wrong color skin, uh, lives with his grandmother, father not in the picture, his mother is a recovering addict. Uh, and these are the children that show up in our schools. These are the kids that we need to do our best work for. And it literally, I think, can be a question of engagement or die in that sense. Because if this young man ends up trending down the wrong paths, which are there around him being offered up, that's going to, you know, lead to one type of life, or that isn't going to be the best. But if we can do our best for students like him, if we can see him for who he is, see him for the genius that he brings in, then we have a chance of doing something special and of really flipping potentially his life outcomes. Because at the end of the day, that's what this work is about. It is about construction of society. It is about, you know, what are we doing to build the next generation? And so want to dive into that a little bit more, because for a kid like that to come in and for us to think, I'm going to really get them to know chemistry, and I'm going to really get them to know the ideal gas laws, and I'm going to really, you know, the next class, I'm going to really get them to know Newton's laws, and I'm going to really get them to know about the French Revolution. None of that matters to this kid. None of it. And if you approach it that I want to download this information into his head and have him regurgitate it to me, it's not going to work. Thinking about how we can get to know students like this through experience, through relationship, and then using those things as the mechanism and the context for where we learn and where we take learning can revolutionize what we do in this work. So, you know, and I know he loves skateboarding. So what if that were the starting point? What if skateboarding were the starting point for his educational journey, starting with something that he loves? How might that look? So these are the types of things we need to rethink in the way that we do this work for students like this. Okay, so how do we start doing this thing of honoring the stories that students bring, of honoring the culture they bring, of honoring where they are in a system where we might see, you know, 5 classes of 30 students, where we're being tasked with teaching things like the ideal gas laws and 5-paragraph essays, and making students have the grammar right, making sure students have the grammar right. I'm going to offer up a few ideas, and then I want to show some work samples that hopefully begin to push thinking, and offer up some ideas about how you might get started with doing some of this type of work. But I think the place that you got to start is reframing your mindset. I think we all as educators have to reframe our mindset around how we start with this work. And I know as a young educator coming in, teaching, you know, being tasked with teaching math, and I, you know, here's the textbook. this is this algebra course, and you got to get them ready so that they can take the calculus class. I made classic errors, and I can think back on students where I was like, oh, I didn't do a good job for that student. Simply because if I can have the goal that they are going to learn and be able to do well on exams of these very specific type of math problems that I want to get into their brain. But people do what they want. People are free, and people will make the choices that they want to make. And oftentimes, in particular, when you're a teenager, when you're a young child, and the thing isn't clicking right away, it's just like, nah, leave me alone. I don't want any part of this. So I think you have to start with being curious. You got to start with being curious about the students, about who they are, and you have to start with being curious about the way we have created this education system that's largely based on an English, and prior to that, German impression structure, that doesn't necessarily isn't founded in all of the cultures of the world. Brazil is a very different place than England, and the diversity of the people is very different, and so thinking about, in our local context, being curious about the ways that our culture and our context should help create curriculum. Being curious about youth culture. What are students actually interested in? Because it's one thing for me to try to teach classics, Shakespeare and Chaucer. Those were actual texts that I had to read, and I didn't understand. As a young kid, I did not get it, why I was reading these weird texts that had nothing to do with my life. Why wasn't I reading texts about, baseball players, which was what I was interested in, about adventures, about people from communities like where I grew up, and so being able to be curious and really approach students in a way of, I want to get to know what you guys as a culture are into, and then I'm going to build curriculum that way. And then my job as a teacher is to connect. My job as an educator is to connect those things that you're already interested in and push you in a way so that you begin connecting them to maybe some of the classical content that we traditionally cover in school. But to make school a place where you come in, you sit down, and we're going to get all this information to you, and then we're going to test you on it. We've just designed a miserable experience for ourselves. And so it's no wonder that engagement wanes, that engagement isn't high in a place like that, because I think about my own self having to show up in a place and not having much agency, and nobody really wanting to get to know me, and the whole goal is for them to for me to sort of follow the instructions and do as I'm told, to the point where I'm able to pass tests on particular content. It just doesn't sound enjoyable. However, if you start with the things that kids like, play, storytelling, being outdoors, being just, young kids are idealistic, and they come with in general, they come with a feeling of like, we want to do the right thing. Storytelling, if you start there and then build curriculum, you're going to have a much higher chance to bring student voice, interest, and engagement into learning spaces. What that points to is experience. And so we all are hooked on these things at this point, kids in particular, but we all are checking our social media, the Twitter feed, the Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all of these social media apps that allow us to, YouTube, to get access to content that is interesting to us in an instant. But it's not real experience. So the second thing I would say that is important in shifting learning for kids, we got to be curious about them, and then we have to provide experiences, and experiences beyond the traditional thing of sitting in a class, reading a thing, hearing a lecture, and regurgitating that information. Real experience matters. And young people see it on their YouTube channel, on the TikTok, on Instagram. They see it happening all over. They see people living amazing lives, and they want to do a little bit of that. They want some experience, and they want to learn through that. So how can you push outside the walls of the school? How can you get kids outdoors doing something? How can you get them making a thing, building a thing, creating a play, acting, filming, doing photography, doing woodworking, construction, any of these things, which actually ends up making, school in later years look like a kindergarten, a first to second grade class where play is at the heart of it. So how can we as educators leverage experience and provide experience for young people that is outside of this room? And then when you come back into that room, you use that experience as the text for learning. That's what you end up discussing. That's what you end up digging into. That's what you end up finding, written texts and video texts about to further your understanding after you've had an experience in the real world, doing something, making something, and often what that leads to is the students then want to do a second iteration and a third. We've done our photograph, we've come in, we've looked at professional photographs, we've used those as text, we've talked about people who do this work, and then students are like, oh, I want to get back in. Now I have ideas for how I want to take this and where I want to run. This is how the learning process works. It can't just be engaging with screens, engaging with texts, and trying to become the best regurgitator of content. That isn't it. And so this points to the third thing. So there's being curious, there's the experiences text, and then the third thing, which is the hardest shift, because it's a shift on adults, and it's an ask for adults to be learners in the space and for adults to be designers, and that isn't easy. I know from having gone through this transition, because I started as that math teacher. I wanted my students, they had to know this algebra so they could get ready for the next class, so that they could do well in the next class. And pretty much what that did was reproduce the social structure. What I was doing was teaching the kids math who really wanted to know math, who already had a strong sense of math, whose parents maybe paid for outside tutoring, and essentially was part of of the mechanisms of social reproduction. I wasn't helping, truly at that point in my career, wasn't helping kids from challenging situations like the 10th grader I mentioned at the beginning. I wasn't helping them improve their possibilities in life. I was merely being a mechanism of, you guys came to me in this state. Some of you got a lot better at math. Many of you didn't, because of the way I was teaching, and you're going to go on, and it's going to close doors for some of you. And the ones who already had the door open, your doors remain open. And it turns out that's kind of what most school systems, at least in the US, end up doing. It's a mechanism of social reproduction. However, if we approach this as adults, as we're co-learners in the space, and we're designers of curriculum, which again is an ask, things can begin to shift. Instead of seeing the math curriculum as this set thing from a textbook, I become a co-learner and an investigator with students. So instead of thinking about math as something that is just based in worksheets, we can look at waves in the ocean and ask the question, because San Diego's right on the coast. So, a few miles from the school is the ocean space. And so you can go out and look at the ocean and ask the question, how might we mathematically describe that? What's happening, those waves breaking? And all of a sudden, a real life math problem that I don't know the answer to, that I have to learn alongside them, is presented to us. And what I can bring then is my adult abilities, my abilities to maybe persevere a bit more, my abilities as a learner who's gone through the system, who's gone through university, and I can model those behaviors to students, and they can be around that, and they start picking up then on the fact that, this is we're like in community learning together now. I get the opportunity to bring my ideas. It just isn't about his ideas and what he wants me to learn. It's about us together and the things that we can build together. And that's when the room can line up. And so being able to think about, again, youth culture in San Diego, surfing's a big one. The ocean is huge. And so, being able to get outside is big. So all of those things kids want to do, you get down to the ocean, you have an experience of it together, and then you can bring that experience back and unpack it for the content, for the mathematics, for the physics that's happening there, for the history of what the ocean has meant on the planet. And then that flips your classroom. It becomes a totally different experience for students. So I'm going to move on now and show a few examples of what I've seen be possible when you start with experience, when you design from a point of youth culture, and when I bring as a teacher, or when teachers come into the space as a learner and a designer. So first project I'm going to show is one of the more recent ones we've done. And again, these are just examples of the type of work that's possible. And you can see here are examples. I'm going to zoom in here of a skateboard project that students did in a summer program. These students made skateboards over Zoom, over in a virtual teaching classroom. The students all took veneer, which is thin slices of wood, glued the veneer together, formed the skateboard over a mold, vacuum packed that so that the skateboard got the correct shape, and then cut out, sanded the board, and then added the art. So this project was totally developed because we were seeing that kids in our community love skating. Right now, skating is blowing up in Southern California. Kids want to be doing it. In general, does every kid? No. Did every kid in this class? Not all of them, but what ends up happening is when you get into a learning community that's making and doing something interesting, then it has a way of leveraging the student. And there are components to this. There's an engineering component, there's a math component, there is an art component that's really big, the decorating of the board. Some students pushed to get the build done, which wasn't their favorite part, just so they could do the art, because the art was the part they were excited about. There's a media arts, because they made some videos about their experience. So again, when the foundation of the course is built on experience, the experience of making a skateboard, all sorts of content can come in, and the students are engaged because it is work that or it is within an experience that they're interested in to start. Let's see, another summer program. Maybe I will let's see, another summer program we ran. Make sure I got to get the sound shared. Let's see, I got to stop sharing, get the sound shared correctly. A technical difficulty solved. Another project that we had success with that stemmed from really youth culture, you know, is a realization that kids love music and they want to know how to make music. Many don't know how. This again was a summer program where students used small MIDI controllers and made music digitally. So here's a sample of it.
The very thought of you makes my heart sing like an April breeze on the wings of spring, and you appear in all your splendor.
And again, that was a summer program where simple tool, we just get a small MIDI controller, 2 students, a small keyboard that plugs in, and you can operate with free online software where you can change the instruments and you can begin playing with and making music. Am I a musician? I'm not a skateboard builder either, but I am a willing learner. And so I was able to figure some of these things out, but their music surpasses mine for sure. And their skateboard building, you know, probably at this point does as well, depending on the age of the builder. And that's okay. That's actually like the requirement is students will surpass what I've done. So I'm going to go ahead and share a few more pieces of work to you know, just to give this some context. I mentioned ocean studies. And here's a book that students made in our course. And again, the whole idea was to try to create an Institute of Ocean Studies at the high school level. And so these were students in grades, you know, who are 14 to 17 or 18 years old. And you can see the look of this book. It's, to me, I just think it's such a beautiful artistic, such a beautiful piece of art. But if you look at the contents, we studied waves, temperature, pressure, acidity, depth. So the students were learning content. They were making art out of both pictures they took and the drawings that they made that were then digitally scanned. Text was written. These are drawings of the things they saw when they snorkeled. These are texts, poetry about waves, images of the students out, and you can sort of see they're taking their own pictures and they're morphing it and creating, you know, new pieces of art out of it that all become part of the book. This is actually a photo of the California state fish, the Garibaldi. So there's a huge difference between sitting in a classroom and hearing about these things and then taking tests and being able to experience it and produce something that wasn't there before. The production of something that is new can change, is just life-changing and so life-affirming. This is a recent project. I know I'm going to play a quick video that we did with the school. We supported them. We supported a group of teachers who wanted to send up a balloon into the upper atmosphere. And we actually used the music in the background here is from the music class that we taught in the summer, but I'll go ahead and play the video. Let me make sure my sound. Yep, that's all optimized.
Other GPS is rolling. GPS is go. It was a GPS. Yeah. I want to make sure it works. Because then I'd feel bad. Like, I know I charged it. Camera's charging good, yeah. Camera is rolling. Countdown? Yeah, but somebody from here should. Are we gonna get our shots? The shots? Yeah. Do we all want to look up? We have a request. Okay. So what I want you to do is hold it here, and Andrew's gonna let the thing pass, and you'll feel it pulling up. So and I want you to hold it just like I am, and then when they count it down. Oh, that's a good. And make sure you're holding because it'll pull some. Andrew's gonna step over under here. Don't step on the phone. Just step right here. Yeah, right there. Perfect. Okay, yeah, and then you tell everybody starts counting. Hold that. Ready?
Yep.
Get there?
Yes. From 10. Y'all are good. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay. So that school, the students put together the payload. We came in and helped them launch and recover. And the next day, every classroom was watching several hours of video from subspace, from 28, 30,000 meters above the earth. And the students, all they were talking about is how they wanted to launch another one. It was an intellectual adventure. They weren't sure. We have launched a number of them, but it was their first time. And the energy that we saw from that was, it's exactly what you want. The students were fully engaged, asking questions about how that system worked. Why is the thing, how does the thing come down? How do we find it afterward? Like, why did it fly 2.5 hours away driving? And all of a sudden, there's so much content to unpack from the experience of being able to send a thing up, get a new perspective on our town, on our city, on where we live. Those are the types of things that get students really, really excited about showing up to school and about the work that they're doing, because they realize their intellectual curiosity is being honored in that work. I could go on and on and on about the types of work that we've done. A student building a paraglider, all sorts of films that kids have made, building projects, making underwater reefs, artificial reefs, jewelry out of rocks that we find, that you can find, semi-precious stones that you find either on the beaches nearby or in the deserts. The astronomy work that we've done, the rocket building, it all is born out of a negotiation between things that we think students might be interested in and what they express interest in. And from that, we're able to get to all the content you would want. They're just engaged and interested because they're able to use the content to improve the making of their thing, or to understand the making of their thing in different ways. And the content becomes the lenses through which they see this thing that they've made. And then sometimes the work becomes even more important. And I'm going to share something that's personal now. My son, he goes to the high-tech high schools. So he's been in those schools since he was a kindergartner. Like I said, he's a 10th grader now. And I think I was looking for a piece of his work from the 2nd grade. So this work can happen in elementary schools. And because in the 2nd grade, he did a play project where he played a boy who had conversations with bees who were looking for flowers so that they could eat because they were hungry. And they had this conversation about what bees eat and how that's different from what boys eat. And then they go to the local farmer, and the local farmer is using pesticides. So there's this whole dialogue they have within the play. And I'm looking for it for a workshop I was doing, but what I came across was another piece of work from his 4th grade class, I believe, where he interviewed my parents, because the task that the students had was to explore diversity in San Diego. And I started this talk by sharing about my parents being this mixed race couple. And so I'm going to share a piece of that work just so you can see. And then I'm going to share a little bit about what this means to me.
What is your full name?
Edward Victor Delgado.
My full name, Barbara Jeffcoat Delgado.
Where were you born and how did your family get here?
Oh, I was born in, I should put the right place. Okay, Torrington, Wyoming. And I finally got there as looking for work in the beet fields.
Where were you born from?
Where was I born? I was born in Durango, Colorado.
What was your childhood like?
Real good, real good. Yeah, we moved around a lot when we were working in the fields in beets, beans, and what was it? Oh, and potatoes.
Who did you work with?
Who did I what? Who did you work with? With my dad and my sisters and brothers.
It was fairly ordinary childhood. I was raised by my father and then a stepmother, because my parents were divorced, which was unusual at that time, but they were.
Okay, I'm going to stop that there, because if I keep going, I'm going to cry too much. So I was looking for a different piece of work, and I stumbled across that, and it was in an old hard drive, and I hadn't seen it in a long time. And this was like September, like the start of the school year in the US, because it's the start of fall here. But my father passed in August, and finding that was like finding a treasure. And I called my mom immediately, and I watched it with my son, and we cried together. And he passed of Alzheimer's, and this was a video taken just before, maybe a few years before, like more of a decline started to happen with his mental capabilities. So it's an extremely important document. It's an extremely important artifact. And I share this and I tell this story to say that the teacher could have done in this course, could have done something that would have been way more traditional and safe. It wouldn't have been a risk to give statistics and information and data and maybe read something about diversity in San Diego. And that would have been one outcome. But the fact that my son got to do this interview and picked, at the time he picked his grandparents because it was an obvious choice for him. He created something though for my family now that is extremely important. I sent it to my mom. She watched it again. And she had been really quiet through that whole time, and she wrote back. And it was like her first expression of emotion after. She just said, I see him everywhere, and I miss him. And I miss him all the time. Which I think was really important for her. But a colleague of mine, a colleague of mine says that the deal is we're living life together when we go into schools. It's a sacred trust. It's way more than just a job. Any teacher knows this, because you got to deal with everything that kids bring in. This type of project underscores that we're living life together. Had it been, I'm just going to teach you a little bit about diversity, then you're going to do an exam on diversity, then we're going to move on. That's not valuing the life we're living together. So I'm just going to close by saying, I hope in whatever educational spaces you go back to, there is a willingness to be curious, to take some risks, to be an open learner as an adult, to think of yourself as a designer of curriculum and of experiences for young people, and a willingness to experiment with the possibility of using experience as a way to get to the things that you want to teach and you want students to know and learn. It makes for such a more magical place in a learning space or a classroom than what we have done to ourselves over the past few hundred years by creating these learning spaces that are built around standards and testing and measuring and ranking and sorting kids. That isn't very human. And our job now is to take what is there and to creatively comply with what exists, but to humanize it again so that we can see each other and we can be in a space where we're living life and sharing ideas and making and doing and teaching and learning. And that has nothing to do with measuring and testing. Thank you so much for having me. This was a good this was a good opportunity. I'm glad I decided to do this. And I look forward to hopefully at some point meeting you either in a virtual space or better yet, at some point in Brazil. Eu adoro seu país. Sou brasileiro de coração. Seriously, I love being there, and I'm sure I will be back soon. Thank you so much, and take care. Good luck.